Today on the podcast, I talked to Becca Bates, the CEO and founder of Bates Marone Suite Design, and we talk about brand. And brand's one of those things that I think a lot of people feel like, I've got a really good handle on that. And then you get into it and like, maybe I don't as much as I thought I did. And so Becca today has 5 ideas you need to stop doing to make your brand better and stronger and kind of make more sense as you bring it into the world. So without any further ado, off to the podcast. Hey, Becca Bates, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you. We've known each other for 110 years, and in that time...
Don't make me older.
Yeah. All right. Well, we were both prodigies. We started when we were 11.
There you go.
And over the years, learned a lot about brand and other things for you. So maybe just for a context setting, maybe talk a little bit about kind of what you do, what the company's all about, and...
Sure. So I'm founder and president of Bates Marone Suite Design. We are a branding and marketing agency here in Chicago. I believe we've actually known each other about 15 years. Yep. Bates Marone started in 2005. And what we are really passionate about is building and supporting really brilliant brands for our clients. And we work with people that are really passionate. It doesn't really matter their industry or their size. It's more about the type of person they are and how much belief they have in their own product or service. That's really what we look for.
I like that. Well, and I think one of the things that our businesses both share is that when working with clients, you start with a million ideas and there's a temptation to do them all. And that some of the problem or some of the success you can have is by saying no to some things. And you had a recent kind of funny blog around just stopping doing things.
Stop it.
and so some of it is just as simple as stop doing it. I know to plug a book I have coming out, there's a great quote. It's not from me, a guy I really like who his business had all these happy people, and everywhere he went, people go, do you train them? What do you do? Like it's magical over there. And he goes, I just fire the unhappy people. And so it's sometimes as simple as just saying no to some of the stuff that isn't working. And so you and I were talking about, from especially like within brand, there are some things that people do particularly poorly. And you had a great kind of top 5 of things that you run into. And I'd love to just, maybe that'll be our conversation around some of those things. And,
sure.
Just as a first thing, kind of as a novice and maybe as a technology person, sometimes I'm prone to this, the idea that like brand equals logo and that's it and you're done. Branding is finished.
That's number one. Sends chills up my spine. It's just over all the years of doing this, people will come to me. I need a logo. Why do you need a logo? Because I don't have a brand. And it's understandable, I think, that's where people would start with, because definitely the logo mark is a very significant part of the brand. Oftentimes the first impression of the brand, but yeah, it is just one element. But people think that they can go online and buy a brand and all of a sudden magically everyone's going to understand their perspective and their story, and it doesn't work like that. So yeah.
And, because one of the things, and a lot of industries and businesses have a way to do something like on Fiverr, like you can go get a logo for $10, and then there's a way you see so-and-so redid their logo for $10 million. What for the novice buyer, what goes into that probably makes you cringe at the $10 level, and somewhere there's value and somewhere there's diminishing returns? Like how do you see that?
I cringe at the $1 million one too. Just for the record, that's not fair.
Right.
Okay, so there has to be a reason. So, just think about anything in your life that you have conviction about. Mm-hmm. There's a reason, there's a backstory, there's thoughtfulness behind your conviction and your decision to have a certain set of values, to have a certain perspective. And so when you are working with strangers that don't do any discovery, that don't do any marketing landscape, like who else is on this landscape and what is their point of view? What's their perspective? How do you want to be either having points of parity with them, or how do you want to stand apart from them? That thoughtfulness and research goes into it. And I wrote a big long article about, my kind of analogy of how to build a brand properly. And it's kind of like building a house. You got to pour a foundation. You've got to put the framework up. You've got to be thoughtful about it. And I know how tempting it is to skip those steps. I understand People just want to get to market as fast as possible. But it's just a house of cards if there's no foundation.
And, kind of talking about that $1 million brand project idea, what's driving the cost, and at what point is it worth it and not worth it?
Sometimes it's just a little bit of like self-aggrandization, I think, of the designer. I think that in the legitimate side of it is that sometimes there's too many cooks in the kitchen on the client side. Not to say that there's not too many cooks in the kitchen on the agency side at times, but it's kind of like on the agency side, the more creative people you have coming up with ideas for you, more wonderful the end result will be. And if you can afford that, that's great. But I find that when projects kind of spiral into that sort of a price point, it's either because of the fame of someone that's creating the brand for them, or it's because there is a board of directors or just 11 people that have to make the decision and no one can agree on anything. You're not going to please all the people all the time.
Yeah.
And so it just goes through endless revisions.
Yeah. Well, and brand is other things, obviously, which is why we're talking. It's also voice. So I know one of the other things you talked about is this idea that you got to have a voice with some kind of point of view that's consistent. You stick with it. Like, talk about that and how what that looks like and what happens when you don't do it.
So my second stop it is like, stop communicating without a point of view. What common speak is point of view, but in my industry is position. We go back to that marketing landscape that I was talking about. If you want to see the best way to see what I'm talking about is to see when people fall off the path. But every once in a while, you'll see something from Apple. You're like, whoa, that doesn't feel like Apple. Instinctively that that's like a little off. So even the experts, even the best marketers in the world, step off the path a little bit sometimes and can, I don't even want to say stray because I'm not really in a position to judge someone that does such a great job. But I just mean that if you haven't thoughtfully positioned yourself, like, this is where we stand, this is our point of view, this is what we're good at, and I'm going to stand my ground and be here. Then you can be very wishy-washy. You can seem very inconsistent and confuse your potential customers or clients. And
I think the word I really liked you had in there was that, like, it feels off. There's a visceral thing about, like, people are really good at picking up on patterns and when they're wrong. And so if you see something from a brand, it's like, wait, that doesn't compute. That happens for every brand. And so if whatever your company is, one of my favorite ones I used to laugh about, I don't know if they're still there, but in Chicago, there used to be a lot of park bench, like bus stop advertising from this company called Just Decks. And so you'd think that's all that they do. All they do is Just Decks. And then around the edges was like pools, landscaping, dartboards. I mean, just like a million things. I was just like, I wasn't sure what they were up to, kind of thing.
Yeah.
What story comes to mind for you about kind of falling off that consistency wagon? I know Apple's big. Can you think of like a smaller scale version of that?
Falling off. Well, so I don't want to name names, to be honest with you, in the industry, because I think that it can happen to everybody. It's probably happened to me. What I can say is that there's some people that intentionally fall off the consistency wagon, and it's called disruption. Right. So Geico is probably the best example of, like, there'll be this random, like, their message is very clear. Say 15%, spend 15 minutes, save 15% or more on car insurance. They've beat that into our heads so that we know it. That's when you actually do have the luxury to go off message and be a little quirky with these cavemen or something like that.
Yeah,
Skittles.
Cavemen, Geico's, all these simultaneous things going on, and still the message is held together. It's interesting.
It's because their marketing engine is so big. It's such a juggernaut that they kind of have the freedom to do that. And their message is very simple and concise, and they've communicated it. Everybody knows what it is. So now they get to have some fun. Yeah.
Well, so maybe I'm glad you didn't fall for my accidental trap of naming a name. So maybe on the good side of things, what's an example of picking a point of view, I should say, and sticking with it and having that be consistent over time on that smaller-ish scale? So
we work a lot in brand archetypes, is what we call them. once we are done with the landscape and the positioning and the voice and the values and the brand core, we will often ask people to kind of answer some yes, no, this, that questions and kind of narrow down to what their brand archetype is. There's a standard archetype wheel that a lot of branders use, but we like to give them a little bit more freedom. And we had a client not too long ago that picked like Morgan Freeman as their brand archetype.
Okay.
They were like, we want to be like this. So they had landed in a place of like wisdom and experience and trust, right? And I mean, this is why people pay Morgan Freeman to voice over things, because that's exactly what he brings to the
voice
table.
Of God, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I even noticed recently that I caught like 10 minutes of Kelly Clarkson's talk show. Mm-hmm. She has some, like her voiceover guy in the studio, they call him God, and he sounds just like Morgan Freeman. Like they found a Morgan Freeman sound-alike.
That's fantastic. Great. And that probably even like kind of getting onto our topic here, that fits her brand. It's like it's a little funny, but it's, that matters there too. Well, so talk about, I know this happens at that smaller scale a lot, is you get thrown a bunch of tactics, but there really isn't a strategy tying that together.
Oh my God,
and
yes.
Talking about strategy can get cliche if there isn't like some definition behind it. So what does that mean for you? And like, what does it look like when it's working and not working?
Well, I mean, if you ask a client for their strategy, almost all of them, if they don't have marketing training, are going to say to make money, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to dig deeper and you have to say, okay, like we need to set 3 strategic goals for this year. Those goals might be things like, we want to increase our LinkedIn following by 25%. We want to get, 20% more ROI off of our direct mail. Mm-hmm. And we want 15% more brand awareness penetration in this specific vertical, right? Something that's measurable, something that you could do your research and see the numbers on. Everybody loves digital because those numbers are very easy because someone else captures them for you. Some are harder to track, but that's where we can really sink our teeth in. It's the problem when somebody's like, well, but somebody offered me this billboard for $500. Okay. And who drives on that road? And what's the visibility like? And what is it that you're trying to say to the people driving on that road? And is there any message that they're going to pick up fast enough? Yeah. We recently did a billboard because someone opened a new location for a distribution center and we got a spot that said, turn around, you just missed the best deal in this. Yeah. That's a fun way to interact with people, but it has to be strategic and it has to, so someone might say to me, okay, well, should we then run a LinkedIn sponsored campaign? Yes, you should. If part of your strategy is to increase your LinkedIn following, let's talk about what tactics. Yes, that's a good tactic. And let's talk about the creative that will make them engage with you.
Yeah, it's funny. We have the same problem in our business. One of the biggest things we see is that people show up asking for a thing that they think they want made or built. And it's almost because it's the most obvious thing that just sort of came into the world. So it's like, everyone has an app, we should have an app. Or, we want to build this feature on this website because our competitor has it. But there isn't really any connection to what it does for the business. And I think a lot of the value we bring is usually something like kind of helping draw that line. If there isn't one, going, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you don't need that billboard. Instead, if the goal was X, let's find a way to get to X together. And that now we're talking about something that matters to the business.
Yeah, anecdotally, you and I belong to a similar peer-to-peer group in the past. And I accidentally ruined someone's day one time when I didn't mean to. They were very excited to show off their new corporate brochure. And somebody had spent a lot of money producing this brochure. It was well designed. It was beautiful, beautifully printed, and they passed it out to everyone. And I just decided to keep my mouth shut because I didn't know what I didn't know. And you have to be careful, right? When you're the expert at the table on something, you don't. And finally, her name's Heather. She put me on the spot. She said, what do you think? And I just said, well, what was the intention?
Yeah. What is
Well, we needed a brochure. I'm like, but why did you need a brochure? What did you want it to do for you? I can't really tell you. And I knew that there was no strategy. And so that's why I was trying to keep my mouth shut. But, I was just, And so, it kind of ruined her day because she realized that there was no strategy and she didn't know what she was supposed to do with it now that she had it. So I think, it's very important. And that doesn't mean, you've had a million people ask you for a website or an app. It doesn't mean the answer is no just because they haven't worked out the strategy,
Right.
but what can it do for you before you invest in it?
Yeah. And I will say on the flip side, for people listening to this who are on our side, on the agency side of things, if you've ever had a client just totally disappear or not call you back or not do a thing, probably they came up with something they wanted to do that had no strategic value. When you told them how much it was, like, oh, that's a lot for that. And then just they went away. It's like, and I like to recognize when I'm a novice buyer. So if I go, if I go into a Ferrari dealer and I ask how much, I'm probably asking in the wrong place, So if you don't know what's going on or what the range might be, you could be in trouble. But you hinted at something that's kind of leads into one of your other pillars here about like not building two-leg stools, which is my favorite analogy there.
Two-legged stool.
Talking about that because you've got all these tactics, and are you creating something that's got a foundation?
And I think we also need to ask if it's the East Coast in you that says two-legged, and if it's the Midwest in me that says two-legged.
Oh, really?
Right?
Oh, okay.
Why do we pronounce that different?
Born upstate New York.
Yeah. So the two-legged stool. Okay. So what that means is that everybody's always looking for a shortcut. Everybody, either they want to save money or they just want to go fast. They don't build a stable foundation. So they may have a logo and a product, and that's all they've got. And they may decide, you know what, I'm going to double down on Instagram. It's just going to be my only thing. I'm not going to put anything into support or values or investing in my staff and my creative team, my development team. The people that are so much smarter than me have done research, have published research after all these years that we've been hearing print is dead, ads are dead, this is dead, that's dead. People just like tout that all the time. It's still not.
Yeah.
It's still being used, and integration is still far and away the best ROI that you can receive for your marketing campaign. So it's really important. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't be strategic. If you are a service business to business brand, Instagram's not your platform, probably. Neither's Facebook. You're probably going to be on LinkedIn. There might be a place for you on Twitter if you've got a voice. And of course, there's exceptions to every rule. So, you can avoid, you don't have to fall into every bucket, right? But there needs to be thought into it because you'll just fall over like a two-legged stool when the slightest breeze comes along.
Yeah. And, it's a really good point about picking the right platforms. And you mentioned integration. And just for those who may not have a solid grip on that, what would an integrated marketing program
look like? So let's say that you have released a new product and it's going to be in all the Targets in Chicagoland, right? And you want people to know that. So you've got to let people know through different platforms. So you can't just send out like an email newsletter because then you're just preaching to the choir. You're only telling your own fans, which is still important to do. But then you can tout it on LinkedIn, but again, those are your followers. So there needs to be some extra oomph. So then you might want to buy some sponsored posts, and then you might want to dabble in direct mail. Send out a promotion that way. You might want to buy some targeted advertising online to let people of a certain category know that your product's available. And then to even further integrate and have fun, you can have some contests, you can do some engagement. So you can trigger a response to show, like, especially if you're retailing a product, you want to show that retailer that you're engaged in helping them sell the product. So that's just one example.
I think it's such a great point. I feel like, again, people like to do what's right in front of them, that preaching to the choir, our current list, our current followers, all that kind of stuff. Those are people, yes, they already know you. They may even be more likely to buy, but if you have, especially a new product launch, there's, potentially different audiences to go speak to. That's a really good point.
But, it is a balance. I was listening to you talk to Andy Crestodina. That was a great interview. And Andy made a super valid point about, like, take care of your people first. But yeah, you've got to reach out.
Yeah. Well, maybe to maybe wrap up on one last point here, to pull it all together, talk about the importance of staying on message and how that works, doesn't work for a brand. We
have clients that can't get through. I love them. but they can't get through the branding process to even launch their website with one consistent message. So it's like, decide where you stand, decide what you do well. So if I were to say to you, Michael LaVista, what do? You would say, we build amazing websites and digital mobile applications, right? Something, I don't want to speak for you, I'm sorry.
For sure.
But the point is what if you all of a sudden started toying with augmented reality in the middle of building your brand? And so you started talking about augmented reality every time you got the chance. Yeah. Or maybe your thing is that you never have any out of scope. You know, like maybe that's your bragging point about your brand, is that you always have a not to exceed budget, which would be crazy for you. Don't do that.
Right.
But yeah, whatever it is.
What I really want to say is we build billion-dollar companies with technology.
There you go. So stick with it, because trust me, you're the only one that's sick of hearing it.
Right. Yeah.
And I have to remind I even have to remind our own creative team, because they're sick of designing it sometimes. And they're like, do you want to pop this new message in? I'm like, no, like
that's
for a year straight, that is all, like upon a new launch, that is all anybody needs to hear is that same message, so it can penetrate and really get sticky with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because that point about sticking to the message, I think is also kind of a leadership thing. Like in leadership, it's there should be only a few core ideas, and you have to pound them in, because it takes 1,000 times repeating it for people to get it. And the simpler, tighter, more consistent it is, the more chance you'll have of it sticking. That applies to any kind of communication.
Oh, it's so true. Have you ever watched somebody try to recite their corporate values? And they're there was this.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has to be closer to your heart than that. There has to be like a story that each person can connect to personally that goes along with each value before it's really adopted.
Yeah, and I think for some reason there's a little bit of I don't know, like trepidation around picking something. Like it takes a little courage to say we're this and maybe only this, and like draw the lines pretty deep in the sand. I got a line from a coach a long time ago that was, narrow your focus and broaden your market. And like if you can just be known for this one set of tight things, then that little piece, you own the whole thing. I mean, the world's a big place with billions and trillions of dollars of business to be had. So you can't get it all. So pick the stuff that really fits for you. And like, that's your message,
Yeah. And I mean, and it has to be something you love, right?
Yeah.
Like
you
make it something.
You said it has to come from your heart. It really has to, something you feel and believe in and want to go repeat 1,000 times before people, get sick of it.
And it's not easy. I mean, we call our values our manifesto. From our manifesto to our philosophies, it's hard. I have an audience. I have this team that works with me, and sometimes they have to keep me honest, and I encourage them to do so. And so if we're not living our truth, it's like,
yeah. Well, you make another good point.
In the clouds as that sounds.
Yeah. But I think it's great. The point that I like you're getting to there is that I think a lot of companies think about brand as this thing that points outward. But it's something that points inward too, that it really, I know a lot of things we talk about, like our 5 values, core values show up as like how people get rewarded and recognized. And it's kind of who we think we are. And, some of the things, some of the awards we've won, like, we think of ourselves as a company that's a 1%, clutch company. So like we've been given this recognition, but it's only valid so long as we continue to live that. If we fall off the cliff, that thing goes away. So it's like kind of living that and being that brand is I think a two-way street.
Some of the proudest and most infuriating moments for me is when one of my team members will quote one of our values back at me.
Sure.
So I'll be like, I do not want to tell this client what a bad idea this is. Maybe we should just do it his way and do it our way and hope he sees that ours is better. And then one of my team members will say, candor shows respect, Becca, like straight from our manifesto. And I'm like, I'm proud of you and I'm mad at you at the same time.
Yeah. We have a mirror one that's speak and listen fearlessly. So make sure you say the things that need to get said, and you're able to hear those things when they're given back to you.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like it. It's very. Thank you for not being generic.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that those things have to come out of reality. And there was a time, I'll confess, when we did what I'll call sort of like aspirational values, where it's like, we're not this, but we should be this over here. And those don't work, right? And so these came out of, we said, well, let's gather all the people, we love in this company, and what are they doing right? And those kind of things came out of that.
I love that. I love that. Ours came out of not as optimistic of a place. Ours came out of a 13-page rant that I wrote about everything I hated that I thought other agencies did wrong. And my amazing business partner at the time helped me. He's a really good brand strategist, helped me turn those into positives.
That's great. Well, honestly, and that's kind of where we started. Like, what do you say no to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so at the risk of putting a button on it, this was great. Really good stuff, and we should stop it because I think we got to really good.
We should stop it.
We can stop it, but this is really
so that
cool.
we have a weekend, right?
Exactly. It's time for a weekend. So thanks for coming on, and we'd love to have you on again sometime.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Mike.
You made it all the way to the end. Thanks. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video to hear more content just like this.